Girls Who Code event, and I've done a few of them over the years, and there's always like this end session where they present their materials, and they're going through this whole process, and I'm just there for an hour or so to chat with them. And so it seems to honor the work that they're doing, showing up at that end session sort of means something. It's just a little acknowledgement. That particular class, I came to their final presentation and got one of my favorite compliments of all time because one of these young women, for her final project, made a game. She had a little sort of side scroller jumper thing, but the character needed to be courageous, so they had to do these sort of courageous things to move forward. I loved the spirit of it. But she named the character Vivienne, which, and of course, having no idea was going to show up, she was so embarrassed when I discovered that she'd done that. But what a kind thing. And in reference to one other comment, something tells me my advice is not going to be asked by the current White House administration. But, you know, these things ebb and flow over time. So there are so many directions we could go here. And I know I'm going to take some time at the end in case there are questions. But if we're going to talk about AI, let's talk about what I think is the most important question I could ask you about artificial intelligence, which is, are you happy? Some of you look happy. Statistically speaking, though, almost certainly someone in this room is not. Doesn't make you bad, or it's not a problem. It's just we're human. We're not always going to be happy. So here's actually the much more important question. If you weren't happy, do you know what you would do about it? What is the trick? Can you figure it out? We're all intelligent people. Surely being intelligent people, we can figure out how to be happy. But it turns out, one of the more interesting findings in psychological research, happiness and intelligence are essentially completely uncorrelated. They're not anti-correlated, but brilliant people are no happier than anyone else, which doesn't seem to make sense. Surely there's some trick to it that you can figure out. I mean, all of those articles out there in sort of self-help books and magazines, they certainly seem to promise that, you know, there's no trick to it, there's just a simple trick, to quote The Simpsons. So what's going on? Why isn't being smarter helping? Bear with me, I promise this will be about artificial intelligence. Well, maybe the problem isn't so much our understanding of happiness, but our understanding of intelligence. Think about how we measure intelligence, particularly in human beings, but turns out also in artificial intelligence. We ask people questions. Here's a set of questions. If you answer them correctly, you are more intelligent than not. And if we want to take some forms of cultural bias or pure education out of it, we can do a thing, for example, like called a Raven's progressive matrices. But essentially, it is still a set of questions that have wrong and right answers. And you are smarter the more right ones you provide. We're going to call this well-posed questions. And it turns out we now live in a world where there's something better at answering well-posed questions than any of us. I have a couple of PhDs. I was a professor at Cal. I'm about to become again. I have a variety of areas of expertise in my research. I'd be hard-pressed to provide a better answer, certainly within 30 seconds, than Gemini 2 Pro or Deep Research or any of these other models can provide. I just can't. And it's all correctly punctuated and everything's spelled right. Most of my good spelling comes from Google already, so this is a little worrisome. We've built our entire education system our entire concept of workforce, and I think, as you can probably intuit, misaligned our sense of entrepreneurship around your ability to answer well-posed questions. And I hate to break it to you, but I don't need any of your answers anymore. I have them essentially for free, $1 for 1,000,000 tokens. We all do in our pockets. The entire system that we've built for places like this has, within 4 years, been completely turned upside down. And I hope you can guess, this isn't going to be a bleak talk. I'm not just going to run through that we're all doomed, or that there won't be jobs for anyone. But I'm also not a utopianist. We will have to change dramatically. The value of human capital is now changed forever. Our ability to answer well-posed questions, read this contract and find all of the legal loopholes. Look at this x-ray, and is this little smudge a cancerous polyp or not? Produce an article of research on the locus coeruleus and its role in serotonergic intervention associated with depression. All of that, GPT can do better than anyone in this room, including me. So what's left? Well, here's the wonderful part of the story, though it's also kind of an exhausting one. If all of the well-posed questions, all of the things we've already figured out, are no longer what I'm going to hire anyone for. I'm not going to bring students into my lab for it. I'm not going to hire employees for it. I'm not going to ask a human being to answer these questions anymore. What's left is the infinity of everything we don't know. Let's call this ill-posed questions. These are questions, forget wrong and right answers, we don't even know what the questions are. So now we live in a world with artificial intelligence that can do these well-posed questions better than we can. And if we treat that reality right and give it the respect it deserves, and understand that the unique value of human capital now is our ability to explore ill-posed questions, then we have an entirely different relationship with ourselves and with artificial intelligence. And I would claim that, in fact, our ability to explore the unknown is what has predicted positive life outcomes probably for all of human history. It's just we could always fall back on, if nothing else, till this land or add up these numbers for me. And increasingly, not a huge value. I grew up in the Salinas Valley. Every big ag company is trying to figure out how to do robots to do all that stuff. So even at the very lowest end. But I don't care that much about the lowest end for a really bleak reason. Human beings at the lowest end of the economic ladder will always be cheaper than robots. That's not a positive statement, but there's going to be jobs down there. They won't be great jobs, probably an informal economy, but it'll always be there. Where are the jobs of the future? What kind of work do I do that's related to that? Well, what we look at. Why aren't we any good? Why aren't smart people any better at being happy? Because happiness is an ill-posed question. The answer is different for you, and for you, and for you, and for me. And even for you, it's different depending on context. In the winter, the year, everything about it changes all of the time. And it remains the case that as terrible as humans are at exploring ill-posed questions, we're still better than anything else. And if we can build a generation of explorers, if you can lay those seeds, plant them here along the 680 corridor, then you will have figured out something literally no one else in the world has figured out. because there is no system for doing that right now. But that doesn't mean we don't know how to do it. So, having started there, let's say, who the hell am I? And why do I have anything to say about this? So I started my academic career as a theoretical neuroscientist. I did my PhDs at Carnegie Mellon and then had a joint appointment at Stanford and Berkeley. So I wanted to jam things in people's brains and build cyborgs. If that sounds scary to you, then you're listening. I like to think I want to do it in the best way and for the best reasons. So one of the projects I got to do as a graduate student is actually build the very first cyborg. I can't confirm that that's literally true, but I have elected to never actually research this question and just claim that it's true. So I developed an algorithm that learned how to hear, literally by walking around with a microphone and a computer on my back through the parks around the other, less important Pittsburgh. And this system just learned how to hear by listening to the wind through the leaves and the chirping of birds and the breaking of twigs, which was cool, and we got to write a lot of fun theoretical science papers about that. But then I got to take that artificial intelligence system and build it into a cochlear implant, which is essentially a hearing aid that literally wires into your brain, wires into your 8th cranial nerve, your auditory nerve. So it was the first time, take my word for it, that an artificial intelligence had ever been directly connected to human intelligence. And the people that we tested it on could hear 50% more speech and noise than they could otherwise. And all of these were older individuals for whom their brain isn't going to be doing a lot of changing going forward. You put a cochlear implant in a baby, and it can sometimes be hard to tell they were ever deaf, but in an older individual, that's going to be a really hard transition. And to have built a thing that changed someone's life, suddenly they can understand what their grandchildren are saying. Wow, that's addictive. It's kind of a transformational experience. And after that and my work at Berkeley, my wife and I had the terrible idea in the early 2000s of starting an AI-driven education company. I will tell you what a bunch of Sand Hill Road Stanford frat brothers really wanted to invest in was education and 2 married women. But it was addictive again. We were able to build a system that could just listen to students talk to each other online and figure out what their misconcepts were and provide recommendations to their teachers about, hey, these 3 students may not pass your class. And we could do this in week 1 from their interactions. These 3 students may not pass your class. Here are 3 recommendations that have been successful with students like this. So in that sense, it's a well-posed question. We find a pattern. This is a student that has a certain kind of a misconcept, which is kind of fundamental to your course. And that pattern also completes. Here is a learning experience that has been effective for a student like this. But then the ill-posed part. What do you do about it? How do you connect with that student? How do you transform their life? Because it's more than just having a bot bombard someone with recommendations. The human and the computer together, bringing together what's best. And I kind of got addicted to it, so then I started another education company, and then I built one of the first big companies doing AI and hiring, where I had a data set of 122 million people, and my job was to figure out how good all of you are at jobs you'd never held. So our customers were Google and Citibank and Facebook. Actually, the New York Times wrote an article saying Google was our customer, and then the very next day, Google wasn't our customer anymore. They really didn't like the idea that the world knew that they needed help. But what was interesting between working in education and then looking at these massive data sets of working professionals is we looked at what predicted career outcomes. And we looked in those kids, particularly with my second company, what predicted the long-term life outcomes of little kids. again, with AI as my tool to understand something fundamentally human. And it was the same things. It was, for lack of a better way, that I wouldn't have described it at the time, it's your ability to solve ill-posed problems. So what does that actually tie down to? Well, it turns out none of the skills you claim to have on LinkedIn, those were zero predictive. If you are a professional developer, then you know how to write in Python. That doesn't tell me anything. So the university you attend, of course, colleges and universities matter, but we found for professional software developers, a Bachelor of Computer Science from Stanford. Our model said it was the most predictive variable associated with universities, but it was a pretty modest predictor. Not once I knew other things about you. In fact, your resilience, as inferred by our models, was a bigger predictor of your quality of code than that you attended Stanford, which probably isn't what most people think. In fact, here's one of my favorite findings. Again, in a data set of 11 million software developers and 122 million people, we found that social skills were just as predictive of quality of code from software developers as deal volume and salespeople. Now, you don't think of software as a social job, but of course you're writing code for people and with people. You're reading code other people wrote. It's a fundamentally social job, not because you have to be charismatic necessarily while you're doing it, and I will freely acknowledge it was just as predictive, but less common in software developers. But being able, theory of mind, perspective taking, hugely and powerfully predictive. And again, all of these are things I'm able to do because I'm exploring it with AI as a tool. But I'm the one doing the exploring. And so these skills that help people answer ill-posed questions, yeah, it is, do you know how to code? Can you read a legal paper? Can you look at medical imaging? But it turns out in the absence of these other qualities, those don't help. Just knowing a thing doesn't make you valuable. So what do we find? Well, I've already mentioned a couple of them. Resilience, perspective taking, analogical reasoning skills, working memory span, essentially things we think of as being deeply and fundamentally human. I'm in the big 5 personality categories. Openness to change, hugely predictive of the impact you will have on the world compared to the rest of them, except neuroticism, which is always negatively predictive. So it's these deeply, fundamentally human qualities that predict positive life outcomes. And our ability not to say, here are the flaws in this legal contract, but to know what to do about it. Years ago, I gave a talk at this event of chief legal counsels. So all of these high-power lawyers, and giant multinationals were there, and I kind of figured they'd be a pretty jaded and skeptical bunch. I've given talks to rooms of CIOs before, and it seems like their entire job is simply to say no. That's it. That's why they're hired, to say no. And it always seems like, isn't that what a lawyer's there to do, is to say no? But actually, they were so engaged with how AI was going to affect their companies and what could happen, the positives and the negatives. And what I loved, this one guy walked up, I won't mention the company, but he says, we recruit from the top law schools in the world. And all of those junior lawyers are going to come in, and they're going to spend 80 hours a week for years learning how to be a great lawyer. They didn't learn how to be a great lawyer at law school. They're going to learn it from us. They learned the facts of law. They learned all the answers to the well-posed questions. But as soon, because the recruitment all happens, obviously, at exactly the same time when everyone's matriculating, and he says, so I then block off 2 weeks every year right after they come in, because every one of those junior lawyers that we just hired books time with me And I let them, and we have the following conversation, every single one of them. Boss, I don't know if you know this, but I went through and I read all of our contracts. This is the kind of people we're talking about. Obsessives who happily go through and read all the historical contracts of the company. I read through all of the contracts. And I don't know if you know this, but I found, this loophole and this flaw. We could do this to GE and we could do that to Citibank, and there's so much we could do. And he said I'd let them talk me through all of this, and then I'd spend the rest of the hour explaining to them, we already knew all those flaws were there. We don't exploit them because that would be wrong. And because if we did, they'd just do the same thing back to us. My job in teaching my junior lawyers is not to teach them the law, but what to do about it, and how that changes from moment to moment and relationship to relationship. It's exploring all of those ill-posed questions, in this case, of law. And as someone who built their first AI model more than 30 some odd years ago, I was an undergrad at UC San Diego. I'd had a very colorful life up to this point already. And suddenly I thought I was going to stick wires into cat brains and be that kind of a neuroscientist. And then I got recommended to work in this lab, part of a lab of a guy named Terry Sinofsky. And we had just gotten $5 million from the CIA to do real-time facial analysis for lie detection. So my undergraduate honors thesis 30 years ago was a neural network. I wrote the code, and I understood all of the math behind it, and it could tell the difference between a real and a fake smile. It's called a Duchenne and a non-Duchenne smile. If you're curious, one of the PIs on that paper was the template for the character in the show Lie to Me back in the day. So I just got hooked. This idea that I could use technology, artificial intelligence, to understand people. My goal wasn't to help a bunch of CIA spooks. My goal wasn't to build cool AI. My goal was to understand us, a fundamentally ill-posed question, and just understand what ticks. By the way, if you're curious, it's all in the supraorbital muscles. It's the crinkling around the eyes. That's an involuntary response that you typically don't see in a fake smile, but is there in a real smile. But even given that, smiles mean different things. An AI can tell you that someone is smiling. What is the smile? Are they nervous? Are they grimacing? The only executive training I've ever received in my life, we went through this session of which I was not happy to be a part. Typically, my role is founder and chief scientist, and I'm really not down for this sort of stuff. And we ended it, and he said, listen, if nothing else, please follow this one piece of advice. When people pay you a compliment, stop grimacing. It was actually really useful. He said, just imagine they've literally given you a physical gift and respond as though they had. So I've always held on to that with the realization of my life that I believe deeply in my work, but I try to never take myself too seriously. And so I promise I didn't grimace in front of that young woman who'd built that lovely game and named her hero after me. After working on this stuff for a couple of years, I've had the chance to found 6 companies. I've been a founding executive at 6 others. And, I have a couple of companies right now. Both fundamentally work off of artificial intelligence, though in this case, I'm back in my home world of neuroscience. So one of my companies, Dionysus Health, has the first ever blood test for postpartum depression. You can think of AI as being scary and intrusive and biased and absolutely all of those things. But for the first time, we can say, literally and definitively, it's not just in your head. We can literally see in your epigenetics the biological cause of the depression you are experiencing, And what's cool is we can do it before you experience the depression, so that mothers early in their pregnancy that are at high risk can begin therapy. And the dirty secret of all fancy smancy AI health tech is that it changes the health economics. The medical world knows that postpartum depression is real, although a lot of people still think it's just in your head. But it just isn't economical to treat every mom preparatorily, prophylactically when they come in. But if you knew which ones were at highest risk, you could do something about it. Our next target is even less well understood, which is perimenopausal depression, which affects even more women and is one of the causal factors in why women have higher rates of Alzheimer's than men do. And let me tell you, we know more about the surface of Mars and the depths of the ocean than we know about menopause, which is scandalous. Until you think, well, who's paying for us to understand the surface of Mars and the depths of the ocean? And whatever, we can rant, I can. I'm good at it. I like to lean into what I'm good at. So understanding these things, being able to, this just started as a science project. My co-founder and I met at a neurotech conference at MIT just before the pandemic started, and we just sort of were brainstorming philanthropic projects we could do. And then during the pandemic, we thought, well, why don't we mash up a bunch of data and look at suicidality? Can we understand before it becomes an acute and serious risk how to intervene on someone who might commit suicide? And all of this work just emerged out of wanting to explore the unknown. How do our hormones and our genes and our behavior relate to something like suicide risk? In fact, one of the coolest projects we're working on right now, directly related to that, is a chatbot. Now, I'm actually kind of skeptical of chatbots quite frequently. If your biggest pitch to me about artificial intelligence, GPT, is it will write your emails for you, you're really underselling what's possible here. In fact, I have a book coming out called How to Robot-Proof Your Kids, and in it, for the nerds, I developed what's called an elasticity of substitution model. So how does demand for one product or service change given the existence of another? How does demand for human capital change in the existence of AI? But I'm adding in all the nuance that I've been talking about here. And what we find is, if AI makes it easier to do boring routine work, you don't get what Sam Altman is promising you. You will be freed from all that boring work to be able to do the creative work. Actually, if you only make it easier to do boring routine work and not any easier to do creative exploratory work, guess what? You get more boring routine work. The demand for that goes up, not down. If AI is writing your emails for you, you get more emails. And I actually gave a keynote for an event for BCG, their global event. Their two leading use cases for AI is save 40% of your communications time by having AI read and summarize your emails for you. Save another 40% on your communication time by having it write your emails for you. I'm like, I think the lesson here is write fewer shitty emails. This is like a scene out of Brazil where he stuffs the in pneumatic tube into the out pneumatic tube and the whole system explodes. Pretty soon they're just going to be chatting at each other. And I mean, you think the in-joke references on TikTok are completely opaque to you. Just wait till these things get going. No, that's not the value of AI. The value of AI is being able to look at a mom and say with confidence, you don't have to worry, your risk factor for postpartum depression is low. Or in this case, we built a chatbot for suicide call hotlines. It never talks to the caller. Instead, when the person calls in, our system consumes all of their social media data, effectively immediately, as they're calling in. You can do this through a text line as well. And then another specialized AI consumes that and scores all of their historical data for suicide risk. Then another packages that up and feeds it in to a version of Gemini, one of Google's models. The bot, based on all of that, then talks to the call center worker and says, here's why Vivienne is calling in tonight. Here are our triggers, here's what she's struggling with in the moment, and here are things that have helped bring her back down in the past. Just like that, personalized to this individual. But if you let that chatbot chat with the caller, this is pretty dismal, but it's also very true. The caller will talk the bot into talking them into committing suicide. They're very fancy mirrors, and they will parrot this stuff right back at you. But a trained individual using the bot to genuinely, deeply, and personally understand the caller can be transformational, dramatically reducing suicide rates. This is the potential of AI. And whether you're like me and your whole goal in life is just build stuff and give it away and let grown-ups worry about whether anyone can make money, or you really want to be an actual entrepreneur and build a company around that and drive economic growth, it actually doesn't matter. What matters is that we understand what the value of this is. I think it's very different, unfortunately, than what many of us have been sold on, which, again, is let it do the boring work for you so you can do the creative. In fact, most of the research, I'm going to finish with the most of the research comment. Let me just plug why I work with AI. Here's the principal one. I was just asked to join the advisory board for my alma mater, UC San Diego. It was very flattering. I gave a little talk and explained why I do the work that I do and why all these students in the audience should study a sort of weird field like cognitive science. And it was because, yeah, I've gotten to start some companies and I get to do some cool academic work and publish papers. Here's why I recommended those students study. In 2011, my son was 3, and it was the Sunday before Thanksgiving holiday. And we're giving him a bath, and he throws up. Well, I mean, I'm sure many of you here are parents. Stuff comes out of kids all the time. You don't sweat the details. As long as the right stuff is coming out of the right hole, everything's good. So, sort of scrub him down, drain the water, fill it back up, start over again. The next day, he's still sick. And he's a little up and down, but he's not keeping anything down. My dad was a doctor, so I'm one of those people that unless limbs are falling off, you do not go to the emergency room. But we called his pediatrician. They said, it sounds like the flu. Don't worry about it. Just stay in touch. So by Wednesday, he's delirious. He can't stand up anymore. He's lost 25% of his body mass. We rush him in the afternoon before the long Thanksgiving holiday. And they don't even need to run a test. They do, but they didn't need to because they could smell it. His sweat was sweet. He had type 1 diabetes. We don't have any family history, so this completely took us by surprise. How I didn't know what was going on, you think I got fancy degrees, but, it's not the kind of well-posed question I was trained to answer. So we rush to the emergency room. We didn't actually rush. I'm one of those people that actually does that. And I think the doctors, in fearing that a maniac parent was going to speed 100 miles an hour down MLK to the emergency room and kill themselves and the family, they said, don't worry about it. Everything's going to be okay. Just, drive over to... I'm like, well, it's Thanksgiving. I mean, I got to pick up all the food we ordered. So I stopped by to pick it up on the way. By the time I get there, they called the sheriffs. They were like beside themselves. No, I really was supposed to get there immediately. His blood sugar levels are off the chart. If you're not familiar, type 1 disease, it's not like type 2. Your immune system destroys the cells that make insulin. Without insulin, you starve to death with a stomach full of food. Your body can't get the sugar out of your blood and into the cells. So my son's dying, and his blood sugar levels are off the chart, hardest experience of my life, in some ways, was the next 24 hours, because it's already the evening by the time I get there. I've been awake all day. For 24 hours, I was up on a cot next to my son's bed in the pediatric intensive care unit of Oakland Children's Hospital, waiting through this experience of them slowly titrating his blood sugar levels down. Because if they just dump a bunch of insulin in him, he dies from shock. So that was the experience. What really shocked me? Well, as soon as we got home, my wife and I started collecting data about our son, because we're terrible scientist parents, and this is what we do. Crashing Google Docs every day. And before we go in for our next visit, I actually send this thousands and thousands of rows spreadsheet to the doctors, thinking they're going to love me. Not so much. They were genuinely angry that I was wasting their time. And after they eyeballed some handwritten numbers, I said, you got to be kidding. I make models of brains. This is how we treat diabetes. It's not how we do it anymore. But I got home that night, hacked all of my son's medical equipment, and developed the first ever AI for diabetes. And the best part of the story for me is I just gave it away. I got on the phone with every company, Eli Lilly, Novo Nordisk, Dexcom, and I told them how to build it. And I told them I just told their biggest competitor how to build it too. No patents, no strings attached. That's why I do what I do. Yeah, it was my own son, but he has autism and he has diabetes. He has hard nights. When he's having a hard night, I get to tell him there are millions of people alive because you were strong enough to go through this. Because we as a family could take this and make everyone else's lives better. Thank you. I'm getting the strong indicator here that I should shut the hell up, and I have much more to say. So the problem is, how do I balance this out? Let me say the following, just to wrap. AI can be very intimidating. And AI can be a little utopian. It'll magically fix all of our problems. I just want to present something. If you truly want to think of AI as a revolutionary tool that can drive economic development and human development, we need to think of it differently than the way it's getting sold to us. We need to think of it not as a tool to make our life easier, but as a tool to make our life harder, but in the positive ways that make us better. Technology must challenge us. And if you look at supporting local entrepreneurs, not that are selling the next AI to write your email for you, but that chatbot that can support a call center worker on a suicide hotline, as a diagnostic tool, as a tool to help humans do the uniquely human process of exploration, of exploring the unknown. All the research today shows AI helping lower skill workers increase their productivity. More lines of code, more calls at customer support lines serviced. But there's been a recent slew of papers showing something very different. The few AIs that make the best workers better, elite scientists, material researchers. And what is it doing? It explicitly supports hypothesis generation, business models, new material sciences, new drugs and proteins. And then those amazing people who may or may not know the answer to the world's toughest well-posed questions, but they have the magic ability to explore the unknown and leverage that uniquely human quality. That's what we need to develop here across the entire Bay Area, and I highly recommend that's where you invest locally in human capital, not answering standard questions that we already know the answers to, but what do each of us know? What is our unique voice? In a world where AI can answer all of our questions, it is our unique voice that makes us valuable. So, thank you. I don't know if we have a lot of time for questions, but thank you very much for the time. Absolutely. So, does anyone want to inflict more of me on the rest of you?
Girlfriend, you rock.
Oh, thank you.
Can you hear?
I really appreciate that. It's a little twist in my story is when I was little, I grew up in Salinas. In fact, John Steinbeck wrote a book about this little valley I grew up in. The title of the book is The Pastures of Heaven. So according to a Nobel Prize winner, I grew up in the pastures of heaven, and I was supposed to win a Nobel Prize. By about 11, I realized I'm not as smart as everyone thinks I am. And so I gave up, and I ended up homeless. And then I got a second chance at life. The 90s are not my favorite decade. But by the end of the 90s, I got a second chance. And I want everyone else in the entire world to have the exact same chance. And everyone could do what I do, at least in theory. Let's give them all the chance, regardless of where they're born, whether it's in an astonishingly beautiful place like this or anywhere. So I appreciate that. Yes?
Hi, Sheila Hassel-Hughes from Human Energy in St. Mary's College. Thank you so much. Lovely to hear you talk today. I'm wondering if you could just say a little bit more about how you see human intelligence, and by intelligence I mean all those human skills and qualities, what in the liberal arts I like to call the human skills, and AI co-evolving. So is it simply a matter of inventing AI tools that free us up to use our human skills in collaboration? Or is there, do you think, some higher order of human skill evolution that we have not yet realized or imagined?
All right, now for the second hour of my talk. So I won't be able to go into the longer answer I'm obviously queued up to give you here, but during lockdown, Amazon and Facebook called me up. And they said, we just sent everyone home, we don't know what to do. And one of the things they really wanted to know is, how do we innovate when everyone's lives are going through a camera? So again, there's a whole line of research and great stories here, but essentially what we found is collective intelligence is a complex factor. And when you think of AI as part of that, rather than purely as a tool, and certainly rather than as a thing that just gives you answers. So when you look at the smartest teams that are leveraging AI, what they are not doing is saying, here's my question, AI, it gives me an answer and I do what it says. Unfortunately, that's actually how most people interact with it. So the better is what we call centaurs, people that sort of say, this is sort of an AI structured task, this is a human structured task. Better yet are the cyborgs. Everything is a dynamic. We're playing on the relative strengths of each of these and really leaning into them. So that higher order structure, absolutely 100%. I will keep this super short. I had a question. This is a deeply nerdy question. Say I've got two complex hierarchical regression equations that share a parameter. What's the confidence interval of the product of those two parameters? Now, this isn't a question any of you should know how to answer, and even if you're a statistician, it's a pretty esoteric question. It has a lot of complexities to it. I couldn't answer it. So I asked Gemini. It also couldn't answer it. It gave me the answer of the confidence interval of the product of two random variables. Related concept, but it just wasn't wrong. Here's what was interesting. For me, it was like working with one of my graduate students. For my graduate students, their life 24/7 for up to 7 years is their research question. They know more about it than anyone else in the world. So why am I involved? Because they know it, I understand it. AI knows everything. It understands nothing. That's our role. So then I just do what I do with my graduate students, which starts with never assume they understand what they're talking about. Oh, you're talking about a random variable. So I walked it through like I would do with my graduate student, explaining the problem, walking it through the structure. In the end, I had the equation and the Python code to execute it on my data set. Interestingly, neither of us alone could have produced that. So it is that complex of human and machine together. I say I wanted to build cyborgs. Well, I may not be jamming things in your head, or at least if none of you can recall that I did, the chips are working. But I still get to explore that idea of how do we get the best out of humanity by looking at how AI complements us and now how it substitutes for us. Is that, I'm happy to do more, but trust me.
We have time for one more.
Okay, terrific.
I really enjoyed your presentation. Lots to think about. I'm curious about your example of the suicide hotline.
Yeah.
And just kind of AI and humans working together to figure out in real time. In my experience, what someone has posted on social media is a very inaccurate, incomplete, distorted view of what's really going on inside them. And maybe what's, in the case of the person who calls in, maybe what is really driving them to suicidal thoughts they've never written down or never posted. So is there, how are you working out that and making AI a better tool to
Yeah.
for the distorted content?
This is a little bit specific to social media, but as a general rule, what people say about themselves in social media is lies, damn lies. It's not even statistics. It's who, in some sense, they want people to perceive them as, less so who they really are. But once you start with that assumption, this is data, but it may not be truth. Then you can start to leverage. So in building our system, we have a clinically validated data set of people who've actually been diagnosed, treated for major depression, have experienced suicidal thoughts, where we can validate their internal states with what we're getting in this behavioral evidence, which is wildly imperfect and uncertain. And I could get into a bunch of technical details about modeling uncertainty. But so that's what so I have a nonprofit called the Human Trust. And one of the things we're working on there is building a matched data set of epigenetics and behavioral data so that we can understand how choices people are making today, that we might just call wellness choices, are actually affecting things like lifetime income and social connectivity, but also breast cancer risk and ischemic heart disease risk and Alzheimer's and depression. So my interest is the really tangible life outcomes like mortality risk. What we're doing by having the biological component, the epigenetics, is that's the hidden signal of what's going on inside all of us. For most of us, I only get to see the surface detail, the behaviors, maybe your metadata on your phone. If we have both together, can I use that deeply imperfect data, like social media data, to draw insights about what might be going on in you? And one of the most important lessons I have across a 30-year career in this space is a big word: heterogeneity rules. We are all different, genuinely and meaningfully. And the wrong thing would be just to say, oh, this person used this word, therefore they are suicidal. It changes wildly. One thing, for example, even in postpartum depression, the standard for diagnosis right now is 8 questions called the Edinburgh scale, which drives me crazy as a reformed Scot, that Edinburgh scale, but that's not what Americans say, Edinburgh scale. And so you ask them 8 questions, and if they say, 7 to enough of them, then they're depressed, which just isn't accurate. And one thing that every obstetrician knows is that systematically black women will give lower numbers than white women. There's a lot of historical reasons why that's true, but just in their head, they simply do a different threshold. So it takes a lower number to say depressed, because we know systematically women of color tend to underrate their level of depression. All right, well, let's build a model that formalizes and understands that we're actually different. And that's okay, and understands what's really going on biologically inside of us. So your cautionary note is huge, and it's important. And I'm going to throw another one in. This will feel like a totally different space, but it's very much the same space for me. Disinformation. I get asked a lot, I get interviewed a lot about the role of AI in convincing people of conspiracy theories online and faked images and the Pope in a puffer jacket, all this sort of stuff. I will tell you, first off, the research is clear. Really fancy AI don't tend to make people believe disinformation any more than just a lazy fake tweet. The real problem with disinformation is we want to be lied to. And if you want AI to help you make a difference there, you need to use it to understand people, not technology. And again, I think that's the big lesson here is think of AI as a tool to understand ourselves, not as a separate creature that will do our work for us. And now, I will be quiet. Thank you all so much. It was a lot of fun.